it depends on how unpopular school choice bills are. So the more things they're throwing in must mean that it's extremely unpopular in some areas, because almost every public school in the states typically get funded based on students' participation. So that's why many of these states have started saying, oh, these homeschoolers can take 2 or 3 classes, because once they get on the rolls, they can get funding for you, even if you're not full time. They're trying to make it more palatable, again, to those legislators in those areas where they can vote yes for this bill, but the funding doesn't go away for public schools.
Welcome back, listeners. You're joining us today for the second part of our special session school choice episode of Faith in Action. If you missed last week's show, you can visit the Bot Radio Network website, search for Faith in Action. There you'll find last week's show and 5 years of content, including a lot of earlier content on so-called school choice. Sean and I are thankful you're joining us today for this conversation. Conservative Christians of Tennessee exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee, and all from a conservative Christian worldview. We want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God, so please do not hesitate to send us any questions or comments via email. If you need additional resources on today's topic, again, we're talking about so-called school choice, socialized private school, or if you want any information we mentioned in today's episode, email Shawn, SHAWN, at tnchristian.com. He will gladly send you what you need to push back on this education scam that we believe will hurt our children and our state. Today's show is brought to you in the Memphis area by Herbie Systems. Give Herbie Systems a call at 901-451-8214 for all your lawn care needs. Since 1984, Herbie Systems has been the premier lawn care and landscape company in the Mid-South. So give Herbie Systems a call today. That's 901-451-8214, or visit herbiesystems.com and let them kill your weeds. Today's guest is Robert Bortons, who took over a family business known as Classical Conversations. Robert was appointed CEO in 2012, and since then the company has grown by 300% and become the world's largest classical homeschooling organization. He has become a thought leader on biblical worldview and education and culture, and is the host of a successful podcast called Refining Rhetoric. Robert is a member of the board of directors of Gutenberg College, the Classical Learning Test, and he is also a member of the C12 group. Robert and his wife, April, live in North Carolina with their 3 young children. Today, we welcome Robert Bortons back for the second part of this interview. Shawn, I believe you had a question you wanted to ask Robert.
Well, let me do this for a second, Robert. Let me take us to Tennessee specifically. And in the legislation we see right now, we see some very real issues. And I'd like to hear your comments on what you think. Is this what other people have done? Are they just repeating the same thing? Like right now, our governor has come out and said that any of the funding to a school, when a student is removed and he or by his family chooses to go to another school using a voucher, that school that the child is removed from would always continue to be funded at the same level. We also see that there are initiatives that don't come out of our education funding to pay for gyms, roads, bridges, infrastructure stuff for these small communities to build schools, or supposedly, and it's clearly a bribe in my book. We're seeing a lot of stuff thrown in here, and I don't want to give these guys too much credit as if they're geniuses. Is this what's being done everywhere?
Yes. So it depends on how unpopular school choice bills are. So the more things they're throwing in like that must mean that it's extremely unpopular in some areas, because almost every public school in the states, typically they get funded based on students' participation. So that's why many of these states have started saying, oh, these homeschoolers can take 2 or 3 classes, because once they get on the rolls, they can get funding for you, even if you're not full time. And so they're trying to make it more palatable, again, to those legislators in those areas where they can vote yes for this bill, but the funding doesn't go away for their public schools. So you're actually at that point, not only are you adding, I don't know the dollar amount, say $7,000 that the government now has to collect in taxes from somewhere else, but a lot of so like in Arizona, at least they made the argument, well, we were spending $10,000 per student, and if they leave the public school system, now we'll just spend $7,000. So that's a $3,000 savings. Versus in Tennessee, it sounds like it's so unpopular that they're saying, not only are we going to continue to fund that school at $10,000, but we're going to give you $7,000. So that's a not a $3,000 savings from the state, but a $7,000 increase.
It's so difficult though, Robert. I know schools in Florida that said they were not going to take the money. Then halfway through the school year, they find out that, we took the money, because money's fungible. So I also know of schools that I've talked to in Florida. Florida is dealing right now with the problem of they're a majority Christian state and they're funding Muslim schools. And there are some of these schools in Florida that have brought in radical clerics, and that's made its way back to their legislature, and they don't like it. So now they're going to start regulating some of these things. They're seeking to figure out how to regulate it because, let's be frank, they don't want radical Muslims. They might not mind if Doug Wilson comes down and speak. I sure would love Doug Wilson to come speak to my children, but they don't want a guy that coached the 9/11 guys right before they went out to come in and speak, or would have coached the 9/11 guys, right before they went in to fly. So how do you handle you can't stop where the money comes from. It's not concierge medicine.
Texas, which is a red state, is going to be subsidizing to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars LGBT education for K through 12 if this passes. Tennessee, right? So you're going to have, imagine this. You are Bill Gates, and you have billions of dollars, and you want to make sure you have a lasting legacy. Oh, look, all of these red states are doling out tens of millions of dollars. Let me start the Bill Gates schools. And now we're funding Bill Gates. Or, like communist China bought IMG Academy in Florida right after this bill was passed. Then the Florida legislators, stepped in to stop the sale. So right there, stopping the free market. And there's plenty of reasons that, communist China probably shouldn't own schools in the United States. Plenty of ways for them to work around it, right? They just donate money to someone else who does that. And so the people like me who aren't willing to take the money, may have a different set of moral values than the people who are willing to take the money. And so you're going to have basically all these educational institutions run by people who have the moral values that say, yes, I support the government confiscating your wealth in order to pay my bills. And even if they're doing a great job, that right there should disturb you as a Christian, because God did not give the state any sort of jurisdiction over the family or education. The state's pretty much responsibility is justice and protection, armies and those type of things. So anything outside of that jurisdiction, God's not going to honor. And if we want to say we're for small government, that's the other thing that really gets me. It's like, okay, if you're for a smaller state government, how is expanding it by $600 million or $1 billion a year, adding a new department to manage this, or expanding a current department to manage this? There's nothing small about it. And, I'm sympathetic, like, okay, well, we want to get our kids out of these, poorly run schools or these failing schools, or give people different opportunities. It's like, well, the reason that these schools are running poorly is because they all have to check off a bunch of government boxes. So the Department of Education in each state, I'm excited that Trump's talking about ending the Department of Education at a federal level. But just like Roe v. Wade was overturned at a federal level, that just means the fight goes to 50 states, and we've got to get the Department of Education out of all 50 states and, return and control more and more locally to, school boards and to families, and not have it run out of your bureaucratic swamp.
What's coming up isn't good. I remember there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Minnesota right now, Robert, that would prohibit churches and religious schools from exercising, from basically using their statements of faith when they make hiring decisions. So they wouldn't be able to exclude somebody, who is lesbian or a sodomite from teaching in their Christian school. And I remember when George Takei came through with the Soul Train back, I think it was around 2006. They went on that 40 school journey for LGBT rights. And I remember Gordon Anderson, who was the president of North Central University, talking about that at that time. And he said, what is really at stake is freedom of association. But that school hadn't fought for freedom of association, even the way that schools like Grove City College had. So people need to look down the line. There are little dots that are lining up, and people, all you have to do is draw a line through them and gauge the speed at which things are going, and you'll know where that's going to fall.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has to go back to your worldview. And I would just say, like, when I talk to legislators, a lot of them are sympathetic and don't necessarily disagree, but they know that that's not where the, Overton window hasn't moved that far our direction yet to have those conversations publicly. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so as legislators, they don't necessarily, they want to do something. And this is the something they can do. And maybe it has some short-term benefit, but the long-term benefit is negative. And of course they run on 2-year terms and things like that. So, that's really the danger from an independence thing on our side is, we want to be independent. That, pre-COVID, 10% of people were already paying their own bills for education. And then afterwards it spiked up to like 15% for a time. But if we have everyone subsidized by the government, then, it'll be Sean, your family and ours, underground independent educators, and every book costs $500 because it's being subsidized. Yeah, people don't understand, like, the textbook that you pay $200 or $300 for in college, like those textbooks for K through 12, half that cost. Why? People know that they're having to pay for it out of their own pocket. It's not getting subsidized by these student loans. And so, the manufacturers or publishers like us, we have to figure out how to publish it and make it for less. But hey, if the government's going to give you a loan to buy my book, I should charge you as much as the market will bear.
Well, I think what we've missed here is the target, which is, why do we educate? Why are we in this? Are we in this to run a government system, or are we in this to disciple and educate our children for the next generation, to make our nation greater, make our families better, make our churches stronger? And when we've lost those principles and our guiding lights, it all goes, there's no fixing just halfway. We really do have to come back to those basic principles of discipling our family and owning those principles ourselves, or else I just don't know how these half measures are ever going to get us there.
Yeah, they're not going to get us there. They're not even trying to get us there. I mean, the Byron Donalds, who's one of the Freedom Caucus down in Florida guys, his wife is one of the people paid to promote school choice, and they have a bunch of schools, so they're raking in millions of dollars themselves in Florida from their school choice. And I was at a conference with her, and she said, a free market is when the government gives everyone the same amount of money and they can spend it wherever they want. I was like, that's the first time
I was unaware the Soviet Union was so free.
She also said that, a person who was starting schools was asking, how do I set up my economics for my schools? Because they could pass these school choice bills, and then the next legislative session cut them all back, and then I have to fire all these teachers, and I've got mortgages I can't pay, and I have to bankrupt all these schools, etc. And she said, well, we just need so many people taking the money that it'll be impossible to roll back the program. And I was like, I had a friend there that was skeptical. Like, he wasn't for or against school choice at that moment. And he heard her say that. And he's like, I can't believe a Freedom Caucus wife is saying this at a conservative conference. And she also said that thank God for the people who are paying their own bills, because the state of Florida hadn't figured out how to pay any of their bills yet. And they would have had to lay off teachers and miss paychecks and stuff like that if they were completely reliant on the government cutting the checks that they owed. And I just point that out to say, yes, it is. They want it to be forever. It's going to be really expensive. And at the end, it's all about lining the providers' pockets. The student families are just pass-throughs, right? It's kind of like, Section 9 housing, right? Yeah, you get a roof over someone's head, but it's really the big businesses that invest and buy these things that are basically getting guaranteed rent on a monthly basis from the government. Those are the ones really making, millions and billions of dollars on an annual basis. And so when you say, hey, I want, to change income inequality, well, guess what? It's the providers that are going to be coming out, flush with cash. Income inequality is going to go up, and inflation is going to go up with choice measures, because we're not going to do this at Classical Conversations, but I mean, it's not like it's rocket science. I hire a couple people to help Sean navigate and fill out the government paperwork. I add a sports team and get them some cool swag. And instead of them $700 a year, I charge them $7,000 a year. And instead of making, $40 of profit on them at the end of the year, I make $740 of profit on them at the end of the year. And instead of flying in Coach or Spirit Airlines, I have my own, multi-million-dollar jet I'm jet setting the Barbados in. So financially, I'm an idiot for talking about this, but I also know on the other hand that my grandparents and my wife's grandparents both had to flee communist countries. Thank God that the United States was still a beacon of independence. And there's not really anywhere for my grandchildren to flee. And so I'm not willing to sacrifice, temporary financial gain for my children's future.
Gary North used to always talk about the economics of the pagan versus the economics of the Christian. And he said, pagan economics experience just tremendous rapid growth, but it's unsustainable. It's based on wickedness, and it rapidly collapses. Whereas Christian economics, experience the faithfulness of the widow with her two mites that grows just a little bit, but it is rock solid. Well, just so our listeners know what the Tennessee Constitution says, in Article 11, Section 12 of that says, the state of Tennessee recognizes the inherent value of education and encourages its support. The General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance, support, and eligibility standards of a system of free public schools. The General Assembly may establish and support such post-secondary educational institutions, including public institutions of higher learning, as it determines. So there is that we have to contend with. Robert, if you were a school board member, would you just spend a lot of your time once you were elected saying, hey, everybody, this is what I want to do. Do you support this? Because they won't let us do it.
Well, I don't know what your Tennessee laws are, but you can determine whether you want to follow them or not. I really believe in the lesser magistrate doctrine. So
we are great proponents of Pastor Trewhella, and had him on the show several times, because we do believe that there is a responsibility at the local level for us to step in and protect the innocents. And we think this is one of those issues that is crucial for us. We have to step in this moment. We have to talk about educating the least of us in our community, because we're failing at it. And it's time for us to rise up as a community from the pulpit, from the families, and do what it is. If it's small micro schools, if it's just turning our churches into discipleship academies, whatever it is, we ain't doing it right, and we got to fix something.
Well, when you think about like the cycle of poverty, right? You get these single, you get people married or out of wedlock, or, have a kid, then get divorced. And, there's not that economic stability for them. And then the parents, even the best ones, they're working 3 jobs a week. And, they're never at home. And so the state raises these kids. And so, but if you have, if you're able to step in and help with the homeschooling, or if the church is providing funds to give them a Christian education, you can start putting these mentorship in places. You can help stop some of these cycles of poverty from continuing. But if you outsource it to the government, it's not just going to continue, it's going to accelerate. And so we've seen that acceleration. And, that's when you get, 6 grandchildren for every grandparent, because there's that hopelessness there, because, there's no sense of community. There's no one else. There's no neighborly love. We're not being good neighbors to each other. We're saying, hey, if you have a problem, go to the state to get it fixed. And the state's a faceless bureaucrat. And if they're not, if God hasn't, given them that ability to actually fix the issue, then they're going to be struggling. And I mean, that's what you see, like the foster care system. I think, the average employee tenure in the foster care system is like 18 months or something. So it's like, I mean, like even the people that go in with a good heart, I want to help all these foster kids, they only last like a year and a half because the system just destroys them. And then you've got, different states that are saying, hey, if you're a Christian, you can't foster kids because we don't want your, radical ideologies being thrown upon them. So, the church has to step up. That's the other problem with school choice is they think the government just can throw some money at a problem and it's going to fix it. The problem is us, right? It's us at the church. We've got to do the hard work, but that hard work's rewarding and offers eternal blessing. So, ultimately the answer is the church. And so whether it's, and I think some of that, you asked earlier about our pastor. I mean, some of it was and has been those early homeschoolers and people that are sending their kids to Christian education, kind of putting some pressure on them to do some things. I mean, like obviously my family doesn't need those resources to help us homeschool, but when the plate gets passed around for Christian education, we're writing a good check because we want those people in our family that are in our extended family and our church family to be able to have those same blessings that we have. And so, we support our local classical Christian school. If there's a fundraiser, there's going to be abortons there, even though we don't sell our curriculum to them. In some ways, they're competitors to us because people bounce, to them sometimes and to us at other times. And why would you want your competitors? Like, well, I don't think there's any competition. The competition is Christian education, private Christian education, and state-funded education.
But I mean, these are the people that they're going to have to govern society with, that they're going to have to navigate society with. These are the people that, if it's falling down that's not your kid track, if they end up in government schools, these are the people that are going to be educating your grandkids or your kids. So yeah, in a world where everybody wants to do short-term missions trips that cost a ridiculous amount per pop, this is a very practical way to love your neighbor comparatively. I would say investing in Christian education is better than short-term missions. Sorry, short-term missions pastors.
You look at the statistics. If it's not your kid, praise God, but it's his two best friends. And how much influence are they going to have?
Amen.
If they're spending 8 hours a day with them and you're seeing them at dinner time and a few hours on the weekends.
And my kids are going to be dating and potentially marrying those kids from these other institutions, and none of the community needs to be allowed to slip. We need to be focusing on making it all more Christian and more Christ-like. Yes, I hope that CC is the vehicle that everybody picks. I love it. I love to advocate for it because I think it's a quality program. But I am not a bit offended when someone else tells me that they're using a different program that's Christian-based, and I think that it's creating good kids in my church because that's exactly what I need to happen in my community. I need them discipled well.
Like, think about that. Like, typically I'll get a handful of letters a year going on short-term missions. Well, that's, for our elementary school program for an entire year is less than $1,000. And for our high school program, I just rounded up, is about $2,000 so for the price of a short-term missions trip, which, I went on a number of those growing up and great experiences, but for $2,000 a year have a much greater impact. And, we failed at missions locally, right? We wouldn't have 6% of the U.S. having a biblical worldview and 80% of kids walking away from the church once they turn 20 if we were winning the local missions. And so you can only have successful short-term outreach if you're filled up, right? You can only give what you have. And we've created a desert inside of our own churches and expect us to be able to go somewhere else. I mean, we're probably about 10 years away from Kenyans sending missionaries to the U.S. to help us get on the straight and narrow.
Folks, we hope you gain as much from this conversation as we did. This talk with Robert Bortons of Classical Conversations should help us all see why we must keep this so-called school choice, this socialized private school out of Tennessee. Each week in Nashville, Memphis, and all over Tennessee, we talk about more ways to put your faith into action, but we're specifically calling on you to reach out to your elected officials and tell them to stop the school choice scam. The governor's called a special session on January 27th to short circuit the legislative process and to ram this school scam bill that is loaded with pork and payoffs. You have to reach out to your elected officials now, not next week. They need to hear your voice clearly now. Tell them this is not a conservative bill. Tell them you don't want to face property tax increases to pay for this, like other states have already had to do. Tell them to fix the broken education system that schools have, because this bill doesn't address the 80% of kids that can't read at grade level. Tell your elected officials you expect them to vote no on so-called school choice. Folks, if you want more talking points on so-called school choice, just email Shawn, that's SHAWN, at tnchristian.com, and he will help you to get the information you need, or you can head on over to botradionetwork.com and search for Faith in Action. There we have links to 5 years of past shows, and remember, the Lord shall reign forever and ever.